Well, good morning from Standards Plus History Academy and Barry Jones. And we are preparing to do episode 66 today. And we're also preparing in my neck of the woods to get some nasty weather. You know, I was born and raised in Indiana, northern Indiana, and northern Michigan. And to get a day off of school growing up was like very unusual. We were used to bad weather, especially snow. We got all that lake effect snow. So we'd wake up in the morning, there'd be feet of snow on the ground. We'd still be going to school. It was a big deal if we ever got a day off of school. Here in Tennessee, we get off for everything. The wind blows too hard. It's too foggy. Today it's supposed to rain hard, so they're sending us home at 11:30. Uh, Cold. I missed a month of school one time in Tennessee because we had a propane shortage in the state, and our school was one of the only two in the state that heated with propane. Uh, I missed a month of school one time in East Tennessee because we had a power outage when we had an ice storm and all the lines fell in the mountains. And it dragged on and on and on. I found out from a fellow that I used to run with who worked at the power company that all the hillbillies up in the mountains had stolen all the copper, all the wire when it fell on the ground because it had copper in it. So they were having to restring all the wire. So we missed a month of school for that. Um, we have yet to miss a day of school because of too much sunshine, but I anticipate before my career is over that day will come. So anyway, that was all tongue in cheek, by the way. So we're going home today at 11:30, and today was test day. So day in the life of a teacher, adapt. Uh, I sent out an addendum last night on the way home from school because I got so many really good comments yesterday about the Maria Lorenz episode and wanted to clear up some things. I touched on three items. I'd forgotten the fourth item. The fourth item that I wanted to uh, just kind of go over real quick. I had mentioned something in passing yesterday. I didn't think anybody would pick up on it, but you guys are too smart and you picked up on it. Somebody commented about it, asked me to elaborate a little bit. I had made a comment about E. Howard Hunt being dangled by the CIA in a limited hangout. And this happened after the House Select Committee or during the House Select Committee hearings. Once the CIA had made a determination that Hunt had become radioactive, uh, Watergate just ruined it for E. Howard Hunt. His career as a covert operator was now on the front pages when he got arrested at Watergate, and then he had to go to Watergate hearings, and he gets sentenced by a judge, and then all of this stuff comes out in the what Nixon tapes about Hunt being the key and the lever and all these covert operations going back to the 60s. Now all of a sudden people are asking questions about Kennedy all over again. Where were you, Hunt, on November 22nd? His alibi had always been that he was shopping at a grocery store in DC. Somebody did some checking, found out that grocery store didn't even exist. So his alibi fell apart. And so the CIA decided to disavow him, basically. And they released a memo, an internal memo, talking about November 22nd, 1963. This is obviously written after the fact, post facto, and saying, in a loose translation, basically, someday we're going to have to explain why E. Howard Hunt was in Dallas on November 22, 1963. So essentially, what the CIA did was uh, incriminate in their own documents Hunt, saying that he was in Dallas, and threw him to the wolves at that point. And this was their attempt at a limited hangout once they realized that the House Select Committee was heading in the direction of conspiracy. in order to corral the House Select Committee and to have impact on who they named as conspirators, they fessed up one of their own as a rogue operator working together with the mob. And that's exactly the conclusion that the House Select Committee reached, was that the mob, it was a conspiracy, but it involved the mob and the Cubans and Lee Harvey Oswald. That's how the CIA maintains control over the narrative. They dribble out just enough info and sacrifice an agent here or there and a couple documents that they release strategically. That is also the reason E. Howard Hunt brought that lawsuit that we talked about yesterday in the Liberty Lobby situation. Liberty Lobby published that story written by Victor Marchetti because he had inside information from those hearings. These were classified hearings that E. Howard Hunt had been basically handed over by the CIA, that he was being exposed. So he wrote the article. And then when the House Select Committee did not publish publicly the E. Howard Hunt angle, he took Victor Marchetti to court, Liberty Lobby, the Spotlight, sued for defamation, even though it was true. He knew it was true. It just hadn't been publicly released. He won the initial lawsuit, which we talked about yesterday, but then 4 years later, they had Victor Marchetti had secured Marita Lorenz to support his testimony. And of course, Mark Lane had gotten involved by this point, so they won the appeal. And from that point forward, not only had the CIA confirmed that E. Howard Hunt, one of its own, was involved in the JFK assassination, now a court, based on the say-so of Marita Lorenz, and a couple others that we'll discuss here in a minute, had ruled that not only was he involved, he was part of a plot, in their view, by the CIA to kill the president. So we've come a long way, and that civil trial that we talked about yesterday involving Marita Lorenz moved the ball. You know, if you're using a football analogy, you know, we started in '63 when the assassination happened. The ball was on the opposing team's goal, on our goal line. We had 100 yards to go to reach the end zone. And we have systematically, through these 6 investigations, worked our way across different yard lines. And, you know, I would say that in '64, when the Warren Commission came up, we hadn't made a whole lot of progress. And we were facing a fourth down. And then all of a sudden, Clay Shaw trial and Jim Garrison and the Zapruder film. And boom, that got us the first down to continue the drive. And then we get into the Watergate hearing, and I think that moved the ball significantly. That was like the equivalent of a chunk yardage play. We threw the ball over the top and got about 50 yards on that play, moved across midfield, because now all of a sudden we know that because of the tapes, we know there's complicity here on the part of the CIA, on the part of Richard Nixon, on the part of E. Howard Hunt, and all these Watergate plumbers. And well, we now have something to work with. And then as a result of that, we have the House hearings, and we move the ball, 10 more yards, 20 more yards, whatever. And then we have the now let's see, which one did I miss? Oh, we had the church hearings first. The church hearings first, that moved the ball. That was another chunk play. And then we have the House hearings, and then we finished it up with the civil trial. So we are in the red zone. We are, as far as JFK researchers are concerned, we are in the red zone. But we have a lot of people to thank. We owe a lot of people a debt of gratitude for that drive. And today we're going to discuss some of those people and where we are at this point in time. What have we learned after 6 investigations? And we've learned a lot, as I just detailed. We've learned a lot about the plot itself and all the players and the moving parts. But one of the biggest things we've learned through this, I think, is that we've been lied to. I think that's a seminal moment in U.S. history, in anyone's history, or understanding of history to realize that you've been lied to. I don't know who said this. I can't remember. I saw it once, but I've heard it said it's easier to lie to someone than to convince someone that they've been lied to and or that they believe the lie. People take ownership of the lies. People grasp on to the lies in absence of anything else. Uh, Maybe it's because they don't want to work that hard to uncover the truth. Maybe it's because they're just unusually trusting of whoever is lying to them. There could be a variety of reasons. It does satisfy a psychological need that we all have to understand events around us and to be able to assign blame, to have a good guy and a bad guy, and to be able to feel like there's been some vindication or some sort of outcome that satisfies the need for either revenge or justice, whatever. These are psychological needs. The government understands this. When they run psyops against us, their own people, the United States population, they craft these strategies to meet those psychological needs, and people grasp on, especially when unexplained. We just saw it with COVID, with all the uncertainty, and nobody knows what's true, what's not true, what news source to listen to, what news source not to listen to, what strategy works, what strategy doesn't work. Nobody knew anything. And so in absence of any certainty, you turn to someone or something that you've placed your trust in. And many people, that trust is in the government. And that's true in a JFK assassination. It could be true in a Martin Luther King assassination. That could be true in a Bobby Kennedy assassination. That could be true in a war situation. That could be true in a pandemic. It could be true in all sorts of situations where you find yourself uncertain. You don't know in real time what's happening, and you want someone to tell you. And you want someone to say it's going to be okay. And you want someone to say, here's who's to blame, and here's how we fix this. And so what we've learned through this is that not just one generation, it started in the 60s, but it's continued. We've been just systematically lied to year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. And unwinding all that is hard. It's hard to find the truth in real time in the moment when it happened. It's especially hard to go back and retrace your steps and unwind or the lie and find the truth after the fact. Witnesses die, evidence gets destroyed. Uh, the lie hardens, and people buck up and they resist the effort to find the truth. They'd rather just believe the lie. It's easier. And of course, to believe the lie means that you have to confront the idea that you or your society or your government, your nation is capable of evil. And a lot of Americans reject that. We don't want to believe that we are the bad guys ever. We're always the good guys, the guy on the white horse. We believe our government is altruistic in its motives, and we're raised to believe the best. I mean, when I was a little kid, I was taught George Washington cut down a cherry tree because he was unfailingly honest. That's what I was taught. Uh, you go through all the myths and legends and things, and you probably could tell me all the legends and myths that you've believed. And I'm sad to say that I have found out that Americans are just as capable of evil as anyone else around the world. And our institutions, which are made up of human people, are capable of just as much evil as any other institution around the world, and indeed have been guilty of such. So I think after 6 investigations, that's one of the biggest revelations, is to know that we've been lied to, and that, you know, it's become a matter of policy for our government to continue to lie to us. And they have different reasons. They say, to protect us, to keep us out of war, whatever. Bottom line, it's still a lie. So the cover story, which we have, I think, covered pretty exhaustively, in this series to this point has been, and it's kind of like uh, again, using the football analogy, you have running backs that carry the ball. And when running back goes down, you have a backup and you put him in. Now he carries the ball. Or maybe you have a quarterback and he carries the ball, whatever. That's what I see happening in through the course of however, 60 years, 6 decades plus. Uh, it started off with the government. They're the ones who put this whole cover story together, right? The CIA concocted this whole cover story and set everybody up, prepared it in advance so that they could drop it when they needed to. And then boom, they've already had Operation Mockingbird up and running, which means they control the media. And so now the media takes the story and runs with it. And they're just parroting the company line. They're repeating like a copy machine or a copy and paste scenario. They're just literally verbatim repeating the CIA spoon fed into the media juggernaut, and they're repeating it. And then Hollywood starts making movies, repeating it yet again. Academia starts publishing textbooks, repeating it again. Publishing companies start paying writers big fat contracts to write books, parroting the story yet again. And the lie, this is why it's so hard to unwind a lie, because it hardens. Everywhere you look, you're being inundated with the lie. In the weeks following, first you have the official government story, which is broadcast by J. Edgar Hoover in his memo, Oswald acted alone. And the memo by the Assistant Attorney General, Oswald acted alone. And next you have the media picking up. Life magazine publishes, a couple of issues that sell, and big time, become bestsellers. And a Dr. Zapruder film with all the frame, certain frames reversed. Movies come out, books come out, textbooks come out. Vincent Bugliosi writes his big 1,000-page, masterpiece on the assassination. And pretty soon it's just widely understood by everybody, even though public opinion never believed the government over 50%. It never crossed that threshold. But it becomes like the accepted conventional wisdom that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Government says so. Hollywood says so. All the books that I've read say so. My textbook says so. I mean, and then if you dare contradict that, you're a conspiracy theorist. And so far, I just compiled a short little list here. This is not exhaustive because we've already gone over this pretty thoroughly, but we've already seen, as far as the government is concerned, the Secret Service was involved immediately in the confiscation of evidence to control the narrative. They scoured people, Dealey Plaza, who had any kind of photographic equipment or film footage or video footage, TV news. They went to all these people and they confiscated their film, their cameras, and said, "Oh, we'll get them back to you." Never did. They intimidated witnesses, like, for example, the Parkland doctors. They sent, we're going to talk about this when we get to the Secret Service, they sent their heavy hitters. They had an enforcer, and they sent him to talk to these Parkland doctors to suggest to them it might be in their best interest, career-wise and health-wise and family-wise, etc., that they change their story about direction of the bullet, about what the trach wound was, or about was this a wound of entry or exit in his throat, about the head wound, and I mean, on and on and on. And so these Parkland doctors, some of them did, some of them stood up. A lot of them changed their stories. And we know they changed the stories because their original story was the opposite. They scrubbed evidence, like they took Governor Connolly's clothes and destroyed them. They took the limo away and rebuilt it, cleaned it up, took out the windshield with the bullet hole in it. They, the president's clothing was really key when you're showing the shot in the back. When Ford's going to move the shot up from the middle of the back to the back of the neck, it's going to be necessary to get rid of that jacket and that shirt, which has a hole, both of them have holes in it where the bullet went through and shows that it was a back wound, not a neck wound. So they got to get rid of those clothings. They take JFK's body out of Texas. This is illegally. They just take the body out of Texas and control an autopsy, completely rig the autopsy in Washington. So you see the Secret Service doing their part. The FBI, immediately sprung into action, covering up things like the telex warning, which went out to all the field offices across the country. Fortunately, we know about the telex warning because one of their own kept a copy of it. He kept a bootleg copy of it and produced it later. So we know what happened. And we know that they're the only ones that had the access to destroy it, get rid of it. So obviously they knew it happened and they didn't want anybody else to know it happened. So they got rid of it. They bullied witnesses like Fenella Farrington, if you remember the story. The Mexico City story is falling apart. And so FBI is trying to rehabilitate the Mexico City story. So they find a woman in Washington, D.C. who had recently been to Mexico City. They produced a picture of her speaking with Lee Harvey Oswald, which was actually taken in New Orleans. They wanted her to admit that she had a relationship with Oswald and met him in Mexico City when she went down to get her family car back. And she's like, no, I'm not going to lie about it. I don't know this guy. I mean, I see him in this picture, but I don't know this guy. I may have spoke to him in New Orleans, but I don't know him. I certainly didn't go to Mexico City to meet him. But, they're trying to get her to lie. Richard Randolph Carr, one of the witnesses on Dealey Plaza, they basically told him to shut up. He said, I saw a puff of smoke over there at the grassy knoll. I saw a bullet go through the Dealey Plaza grass and create a furrow going east. It created a furrow in the grass. And he basically said that he was told in no uncertain terms by the FBI, if you didn't see Oswald in the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository shooting a gun, you didn't see it. In other words, we don't need they told Julie Ann Mercer, who said, I saw Jack Ruby the day before the assassination. His truck was parked right there on the curb. We're stuck in traffic. I turned, I saw him, he saw me. And, while we were sitting there waiting in traffic, somebody got out of the passenger seat, reached into the bed of the pickup, grabbed a rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and walked up the grassy knoll with it. And she said, when I got up even with the truck, I looked and I saw the guy and I didn't recognize him, but I saw him very clearly. And then after he shot Oswald, I was like, that's the same guy. That's the guy I saw. And they literally altered her statements, forged her signature. This is the FBI. So here, again, going back to my original statement about being lied to, Secret Service is there's a narrative. And so the Secret Service is doing their part to protect the narrative. The FBI is doing its part. The Dallas police, my God, I mean, they find a German Mauser. We know that they found a German Mauser because they itemized it as such in the evidence report. We also know because Roger Craig was standing right there, saw him pick it up, and confirmed it was a German Mauser. But then after they go to Oswald's house and search his garage, they come up and they said, no, it was a Mannlicher Carcano. Here it is. And the German Mauser just disappears. They say they found Oswald's ID at the site of the Tippit killing and then scramble because when Oswald is arrested, Oswald has his ID on him. So all of a sudden that ID that they said they found at the Tippit scene disappears. They said they found ballistics evidence pointing to Oswald. Now this is hilarious. Okay. I didn't even bring this up. One of you guys brought this up yesterday, and this is a really, really good point. How would, first of all, it defies understanding. logic, common sense, that Oswald would shoot Tippit and then manually eject the shells onto the ground, pull his wallet out, throw it on the ground, and run away, try to get away. None of that makes any sense, number one. And then to find out later that the Warren Commission produces these shells and they don't match, they don't line up, they don't have the officer's initials on them. And two of them are one brand, two of them are another, Winchesters and Remingtons. They don't match up from the same gun. None of it makes sense. He says, well, how about this? When they arrest Oswald, he tries to fire his 38. The firing pin was bent or broken. It would not fire. It was a malfunctioning piece of crap gun. It would not fire. That's the same gun that he just killed a police officer with. And they now take it from him and realize that with this bent firing pin, it won't work. It couldn't have killed Tippit. And then, the other ballistics evidence they said they found was 3 Mannlicher Carcano shells right there underneath the windowsill of the Texas School Book Depository, which if anybody knows anything about these rifles, you fire the shell throws that. This is why you have a spotter. The spotter is there to go find and retrieve the shell casing. It could land 5 feet over here, 10 feet over there. The things don't just fall out and land at your feet. They were all at his feet. My goodness. This is the Dallas police. They concealed evidence like the nitrate test, which proved conclusively he hadn't fired a rifle that day. He had no nitrates in his face or his cheek or his neck. They ignored Roger Craig, and eventually he lost his life over the evidence that he'd seen. He saw with his own eyes, he was standing 5 feet away when they found the German Mauser. That's item number one. Item number two, he saw 15 minutes after the shooting, Oswald get into a Nash Rambler driven by 2 Latins, whom he described as Latins, and drive away in a Nash Rambler. Well, this destroys the whole timeline that they're already putting together. So they just ignore him, try to kill him multiple times. They finally succeed. Lost his job over it. They concealed, altered, and fabricated evidence like the whole Tippit murder scene. That whole thing was staged. They allowed Jack Ruby, whom they knew. He basically took up camp. Might as well got a sleeping bag and slept at Dallas Police Headquarters over the weekend. We saw Ruby everywhere. Something's going down. We saw him at Dealey Plaza watching the fireworks with his friend. We saw him then down at Parkland Hospital, according to Seth Cantor. He had a conversation with him. That's where they found the magic bullet on the stretcher. Next, we see him at the Texas Theater, sitting in the back. There's a witness there who saw him sitting there watching the action. And then he's at Dallas Police Headquarters the whole weekend, interrupting press conferences, correcting the Dallas DA, Henry Wade. Now, this is fair play for Cuba Committee. And then just biding his time for when he can take care of his part, his role in this whole thing, and that's to kill Oswald. And Dallas police let all this happen. So then, these are the law enforcement people that are in charge of the investigation. Then you get into the investigation, the post-assassination investigation. You got the FBI director sort of ratifying the lone gunman theory, or actually initiating it. And then the assistant attorney general comes out and furthers it, moves the ball down the road. Lone gunman. And then LBJ appoints the Foxes to guard the hen house. And I say Foxes plural. I think there were some honest brokers on that, but definitely not Jerry Ford, definitely not Alan Dulles. That Warren Commission was, and of course, Warren himself was just a figurehead. So the 7-member panel is really a 6-member panel, and 2 of those, a third of it, was running this thing, controlling the evidence, leaking the evidence, deciding what evidence they're going to look at, what evidence they weren't going to look at, protecting the FBI, protecting the CIA. And then in 64, they put out their report, which, they began with the conclusion, and all they did was, while away enough months to convince the American people they'd done their due diligence, and then published this 888-page monstrosity with evidence in there had no bearing on the crime whatsoever, just to add to the impressive rollout of this huge book. Turns out to be fiction, basically, and was set up to fail by its very composition. And then in the months and years afterwards, as people start to emerge, JFK researchers, people who dispute the government version, the CIA drops on its Operation Mockingbird media the term conspiracy theorist. This is a way to denounce or ridicule, discredit, oppose any search for the truth. We'll just call them conspiracy theorists. This is I tell you, if whenever you hear labels like this, science deniers, conspiracy theorists, one of the ones after 2020 was election deniers, climate deniers, or climate change deniers. These labels, anti-vax, right? These are labels. And when you hear that, in my mind, I just go back to this and I realize what it is. This is a very effective strategy to shut down debate, to shut down dialogue, and that's what they've done. I mean, some people didn't curtail; they continued to plow through, but a lot of people, they don't want to be smeared with these pejorative labels. I was listening to Bobby Kennedy Jr. He's running for president. I was just listening to a podcast recently. He was talking. He's been called everything under the sun by the government, and he's talking about how, this is the strategy. This is what they do, and this probably in their playbook. This is play number one. And then major media and education continued to parrot, ratify the cover story, and intentionally spread this disinformation. The truth becomes the lie, and the lie becomes the truth. And that's where we are. That's what we have uncovered after 60 years. And, after 60 years, though we have learned a lot, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And of course, even after the government came out with its cover story and ratified it with all these investigations and commissions and reports, et cetera, and all the books and all the movies, and I think instinctively people are suckers for the truth. And if they feel like they're being misled in some manner, shape, form, there's something inside of us that yearns for what the real story is. And there's this longing, this desire to find out the real truth. And that's why I just believe the truth inevitably wins out, because it's like it resonates with our heart, with our spirit, with our mind. And take all that, put it together. And when you hear the truth, you know that you just heard the truth. When you hear a lie, there's doubt. No matter how hard you're being pressed on every side, how much you're being intimidated, or how much you're being influenced to believe this. My wife and I, on the occasion we get in an argument or something, if I press too hard my version, my wife says, I know you're not telling me everything because you're trying too hard to get me to believe something. That's her truth detector. And she's usually right. So, that's what I feel like the government, we're in this relationship with the government. It's our spouse. in this little scenario. It's trying too hard to get us to believe something. And it uses all its powers and all of its people and institutions and things that are under its control to further their narrative and to try to convince us, look, they said so, they said so, everybody's saying so. Everybody agrees. And when I hear that, when I hear everybody believes or everybody agrees or this is conventional wisdom, I really, my radar goes up at that point. Hitler used to say, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. And I think this goes to that psychological warfare we were talking about earlier, that people tend to think, to give the benefit of the doubt, I would never lie this big, so surely they wouldn't lie this big to me. So it must be true. We all lie little time, little white lies. We're all guilty of that. And so when somebody kind of dances around the truth and tells a little bit of truth, a little bit of lie, our radar goes up. We think, oh, they might be lying to us. They might be exaggerating. But then someone comes right out, hits you front in the face with a full-fledged lie. I mean, a big lie. You're like, well, you wouldn't lie about that. I wouldn't. And we project on them the fact that we wouldn't lie like that. And so we assume, we give them credit that they wouldn't either. Not realizing that the government would very quickly tell a lie that big if it benefits them in any way, shape, or form. So a lot of this I've learned is these CIA tactics are born out of psychology. It's amazing. They understand how the human mind works and what desires that we have internally that we don't even realize we have. We just kind of fall into this. Some of these unanswered questions continued to linger. And then in 68, when we had the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby, and of course, Malcolm X was in there as well. In a TMZ article in 2019, the families, the celebrities and families of Kennedy, King, were still demanding new probes. And this is after, all these 6 investigations that we've just finished discussing. In 2019, family members, not all of them, you can find Kennedy family members that don't want a reinvestigation of their of John or Bobby, but there are family members. And of course, almost the entire Martin Luther King family wants a reinvestigation into Martin's death, but because they don't believe the story, they don't believe. And so this is 2019. Family members of these victims are still calling out for new investigations because the old investigations were so corrupt, and they realized that. So it hasn't satisfied everybody's need for answers. There's still a majority of the American population that don't believe these stories. And I think we owe a debt of gratitude to some of these JFK researchers that have been very brave. You talk about early on, especially when there's just a few of them. You look now and the list has compounded and compounded and compounded over the years, and the evidence has all been in the direction of conspiracy. It's all been away from the direction of lone gunmen and towards the conspiracy angle. There hasn't been any evidence to emerge over the years to support the lone gunman theory. All the evidence that emerges supports the conspiracy and government involvement. But it's because of the work of these people who worked hard, and I'm sure bore the brunt of a lot of resistance and shaming and defamation. And, I'm sure there was some even physical. Some of these people went to prison. I mean, Abraham Bolden, the first guy on our list, he came out with the truth, and they put him in prison. And all he did was tell his story, and his story turned out to be true. He ended up getting pardoned, but boy, they put him through hell. When we get to the Secret Service, I'll tell you the Abraham Bolden story. They put him through hell. John Davis wrote a good book about the mafia angle, and Carlos Marcello in particular. I think the best book I've ever read, period, hands down. If I had to recommend one book to somebody who was just entering into this labyrinth of JFK research, I would recommend the James W. Douglas book, The Unspeakable. It is phenomenal, phenomenal, and written so well, so well. Mary Farrell started an organization to, basically off her note cards. These are a lot of them are just citizen journalists, people who didn't believe and did their own research. We're all told now not to do our own research. Can you believe that? Don't do your own research. These people did their own research, and we owe them, because you can still go to Mary Farrell's website and find just about anything you need to know about different people involved in the JFK assassination and different theories, et cetera, et cetera. Gaten Fonzie was that investigator that was going to work hand in glove with Richard Sprague and with the House Select Committee before Sprague got basically fired. But Gaten Fonzie was an honest broker, and we owe him a debt of gratitude. Jim Garrison, talk about being destroyed publicly, personally. He lost his family over it. He lost his career over it. He lost his fortune over it. He lost everything, his reputation. Why? Because he dared to find the truth that came out of his city. He figured out that this plot was hatched in a lot of ways out of New Orleans, and a lot of the major players came out of New Orleans, and so he had jurisdiction, and he decided to bring the first and only, to this day, only criminal trial in the assassination of JFK, and paid for it dearly. Somebody brought this to my attention. I did not realize this about Jim Garrison. His wife left him over this whole thing, and right before he died, he remarried her so that she could have his estate. This is the kind of guy he was. She left him, piled on when everybody else was piling on, and then to provide for her, he remarried her shortly before he died so that she would have his estate. Wow. That's the kind of guy he was. L. Fletcher Prouty, now this guy was an insider and was able to tell the story from me. I heard him, an honorable guy. I heard him on several podcasts, and people yell and scream at him. They just can't stand what he's saying. Essentially, what he's saying, he was the liaison between the military and the CIA, the intelligence branches. And when the intelligence branches were running an operation and needed military support, he arranged it. And as such, he knew a lot of the inside workings of the JFK assassination plot and how the Secret Service was involved. You learn a lot listening to L. Fletcher Prouty. If you've watched the JFK movie, you remember the scene where Garrison goes to Washington and meets Mr. X, and they have this walk along the National Mall, and Mr. X basically fills him in on all of the covert operations the CIA's been involved in since the beginning. That character is based on L. Fletcher Prouty. That Mr. X is L. Fletcher Prouty. Oliver Stone, who made the movie, met with L. Fletcher Prouty, and that's the composite characters that they put together based on the information he gave them. I wanted to highlight Mae Brussell. Mae Brussell, pictured here, was just a citizen journalist, literally. She was a mother. She was a mother of 5 children, and she was just interested in the assassination. So she began researching it and appearing in 1971 as a guest on KLRB, a local FM radio station in Los Angeles. And she was so well informed and had done such good research. They gave her her own show called Dialogue, um, Dialogue Conspiracy. So she was a conspiracy theorist, uh, one of those theorists. Later, this show was renamed World Watchers International because she branched off from JFK into other things. And this show went on for 17 years. So it had a following. She wrote some really interesting pieces about some interesting people like Martha Mitchell. Why was she kidnapped? She wrote an article about that. She wrote about the Senate Watergate Committee and accused it as functioning as part of the cover up. She was a thorn in a lot of people's sides. And to this day, you can go to her website and there's a lot of good information that Mae Russell came up with. She said in this quote, study history, separate fears and prejudices from facts, recognize facts from propaganda, invest energy in fighting for what you believe in, analyze harder where we are going and what you are doing about it. What do you really believe in? How much do we care? Yeah. You know, I thought about for years, I've resisted doing any of this and just teach my little classes and write my little books and kind of keep it on the down low. And at some point, I had to realize, and I think I've reached this point now that I have something to contribute, and it might not be in the realm of what these people have contributed. I don't consider myself a researcher. I compile other people's research. My gifting is in explaining it and making it easy to understand. And I've always been told that. And so I figured, at some point, I've complained enough about being lied to. I've, uh, I, it's impacted, it made me a little bit cynical, maybe. Uh, Certainly, people within my sphere of influence know how I feel, but at some point, we all have a responsibility to do something that's within our gifting, our talents, our abilities to do something about what we believe. And I'm not a filmmaker like Oliver Stone, and I'm not in a position like L. Fletcher Prouty on the inside. I don't know these people firsthand. I wasn't a witness for. I've just done a lot of research of the research, and I've learned how to explain it because I teach juniors in high school. And if you can't make it simple enough for juniors in high school to understand, no adult's gonna understand. You gotta simplify things. This is a very complicated topic, and I think that's where a guy like me comes in, and that's why I'm doing this. I feel like Mae Russell said, I had to answer that question: how much do I care? Do I care a little bit to put myself out there? Do I care enough to open myself up to public criticism or whatever? Do I care enough about the truth that I will fight my fight and do what I can to preserve or get to the truth? Or will I just complain about it and keep it to myself? Because I believe if you don't have truth, you have no freedom. And that's as a society, that's as an individual. If you're living a lie, you're not free. And that's true of me as a person. That's true of us as a society. So these are some heroes that I wanted to mention. Here's some more. Robert J. Groden. A lot of people are familiar with Robert J. Groden. He was the guy we owe Robert J. Groden a debt of gratitude because he's the one that made a bootleg copy. He was a photography expert. And he's the guy that made the bootleg copy of the original Zapruder film. And his copy actually got seen publicly on the Geraldo Rivera show. And, the government never intended for the American people to see this Zapruder film. And if they did, it was going to be the doctored copy. But because of a guy like Robert J. Groden, he took it on the Geraldo Rivera show, and we got to see it. And it changed the way people viewed or thought about the assassination. I mean, people already suspected they weren't being told the truth when they saw it with their own eyes because of Robert J. Groden. He's also the guy that introduced us to Oswald's alibi, the Geraldine Reed story. If it's not for Robert J. Groden, we don't know about Geraldine Reed, the bookkeeper at the Texas School Book Depository who was making change for Oswald at the moment the shots happened. She was literally he was in her office getting change. Thanks to Robert J. Groden, we know that story. He co-wrote his books with Harrison Edward Livingston, another JFK researcher. You got Penn Jones, Mark Lane. Mark Lane was one of the originals. And, his original book that he published, Rush to Judgment, he couldn't get anybody to publish it. It took somebody from the pressure was exerted, according to Mark Lane, pressure was exerted by the FBI and the CIA against publishing houses. Do not publish this book. And a British company out of London finally agreed to publish the book. And then subsequently, years later, Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston published it here in America. Boy, did that change a lot of people's views about the assassination. Jim Garrison read that book. It was based on that book by Mark Lane. Jim Garrison got interested in the JFK assassination and later produced the movie. And he hired Mark Lane to help him do this movie. And I told you the story at the beginning today, how he participated with Victor Marchetti to argue the appeal for the Lit for Liberty lobby and the story that they've written about E. Howard Hunt. According to Mark Lane, he discovered not only Maria Lorenz as a source, but he also consulted with James Angleton, Alan Weberman, David Atlee Phillips, Richard Helms, former director of the CIA, G. Gordon Liddy, one of the plumbers from Watergate, Stansfield Turner, another director of the CIA, and Marita Lorenz. And it was based on the testimony of all these people and the information he gleaned from all these people. And of course, Marita Lorenz was a star witness, that the civil trial ended up the way it did. Mark Lane is a huge contributor to what we now know about the JFK assassination. Victor Marchetti was the author of that story. Jim Marrs, I've mentioned Jim Marrs before. Jim Marrs, and again, I always use Jim Marrs and Mark Lane. These are my two plumb lines. I always go, when I'm looking at a source, I'm trying to figure out, is this source credible? Because I see what the internet says. I hear what people say. Oh, Judith Ferry, she's, oh, Dorothy Kilgallen. Oh, Edward Haslam. Oh, they're messy. James Files. I don't listen to any of that. I go to Jim Marrs. I go to Mark Lane. I go to people like that, and I say, what did they think about these people? Because chances are they talked to them. They were that kind of researcher. And that's why I put credence in what these folks say, because in every one of those cases I just mentioned, Mark Lane, Jim Marrs, lions of the JFK Research Committee vouch for their credibility. They corroborate their story. They've taken all the pieces, and they know all the pieces in their head, and they know the right questions to ask. They probe, and and their credibility is on the line too. So a lot of stock I put in Jim Marrs and Mark Lane, what they think about witnesses. Barr McClellan was an insider who exposed LBJ's role in all of this. James DiEugenio has been working with Oliver Stone, Destiny Betrayed, all these video series and textbooks and things that have been coming out here recently. These are relatively current. He's been a mover and shaker and really had an impact on Oliver Stone. And, you think about James DiEugenio and the influence he has is fairly limited, but because he has influence with Oliver Stone has a huge audience. So if guys like Mark Lane writes a book, Oliver Stone reads it. James DiEugenio writes a book, Oliver Stone reads it, includes them in his next project, produces this huge movie, Oliver Stone, or JFK, which becomes a huge hit. gets legislation passed to open up the records and create the AARB, and then later does history series, untold history of the United States video series that you can show your students, textbooks, all these things that Oliver Stone has done. Doesn't happen without guys like James DiEugenio and Mark Lane. How about Mort Sahl? Mort Sahl was a comedian of all people. And he took a lot of grief because he worked it into his comedy routine, how ridiculous the Warren Commission was. And when he was asked, because he was always advocating for a new investigation. And when he was asked by Johnny Carson or anybody in his world, what's the purpose of a new investigation? We already know the truth. Sahl would say, no, we don't. He says, well, the purpose would be maybe we could find out who killed the president, why he was killed. I'd settle for that. Mort Sahl made it cool in Hollywood to actually contest the findings of the Warren Commission. Peter Dale Scott, another prominent researcher. Oliver Stone, I've mentioned. I have so much respect for that guy. I have so much respect for Oliver Stone. It's one thing to stand in front of a JFK conference and talk about conspiracy. It's another thing to go into the lion's den and do it. And that's what Oliver Stone has done since 91 when he produced JFK. He's gone into the lion's den, public Hollywood culture, the culture, the public culture. He's been lampooned by everybody. And this is a guy who had a big name coming in. All he could do was hurt his name, and it has hurt his name. It's hurt his brand, and he's become obsessed with it. I love to listen to him on podcasts. He does not suffer fools easily or well. If people haven't done their research, he gets frustrated with them. This is a guy who served in Vietnam. This is a guy politically. We're probably on different ends of the spectrum. I have respect for people who show courage, and Oliver Stone shows courage, a tremendous amount of courage. Anthony Summers, Cyril Wecht, pictured here. This is the guy that blew apart the medical findings, the autopsy. He testified for the House Select Committee, arguing against the idea that JFK was shot by one gunman. And he said, based on the evidence, it's not possible. And this guy is a world-renowned. You're talking about this guy is world-renowned when it comes to being a forensic pathologist. You can't dispute the skill and the credentials and things. And when he comes out, it's one thing for people on the fringe. This guy is an expert. He does all the autopsies. He looks at all these crimes. He's the guy that examines these scenes, and he's done it so many times, and he's been so successful for such a long time that you can't question his determination. So Cyril Wecht is another guy who had something to lose. Harold Weisberg, Stephen Kinzer, David Talbot. Kinzer and Talbot wrote books about brothers. Kinzer exposed a lot about the Dulles brothers. John Foster Dulles, Secretary of State, same time Allen Dulles was director of the CIA. Those two guys were in our government and were involved in a lot of these plots, and you find out what John Foster was doing during or around the time that the CIA was trying to assassinate Ngo Dinh Diem in Vietnam. And of course, John Foster was involved, so was his brother. So we learn about that from Kinzer and find out about these Dulles brothers and everything they've been up to. And it helps. It's another piece of the puzzle. Then David Talbot comes along. David Talbot writes another book about another set of brothers, JFK and Bobby, and all of the things that they were into in the 60s, that behind the scenes. He wrote two books, David Talbot, that are really key, I think, really good books. He's a good writer. The first one was Brothers. which I just mentioned with JFK and Bobby. And that tells the backstory of their lives and their political careers. It includes a big section on the assassination. And then also the Devil's Chessboard. The Devil's Chessboard is boy, he doesn't pull any punches. And he argues in the Devil's Chessboard that Kennedy represented a threat to institutions, U.S. institutions that were empowered by and ideologically committed to the continuation of the Cold War. And he points in particular to the CIA as one of these institutions, and Allen Dulles as having the motivation, experience, and wherewithal to, quote, both organize the assassination and then, through Dulles's membership on the Warren Commission, deflect attention from themselves as culprits. Since then, Talbot contends, continuing on, neither the mainstream media nor the academic establishment have given serious enough consideration to Kennedy's vision or the forces that opposed it. And that is a phenomenal book, The Devil's Chessboard. I've recommended both of those Talbot books to you if you haven't read them. How about Nigel Turner? Nigel Turner is the guy who gave us the series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy. It's hard to find, but it's a 9-part series, and it starts off with coup d'etat and the forces of dark. This was produced years and years ago. This is 1988. I hadn't even graduated from high school yet, and this is kind of like the precursor to Oliver Stone and these documentary series, and they're really well done. Each episode is about 45, 50 minutes. He's the guy introduced to us, to the world, Judith Vary Baker. His 7th episode is called The Love Affair, and it's about Oswald in this romantic relationship he had with this woman, this young woman, Judith Vary, down in New Orleans in the summer of '63 as they worked on this cancer bioweapon project and their cover jobs at the coffee company. And based on that episode, Judith Vary had to come out of the closet, basically. It got so much airtime and publicity, her cover was blown. And that's another thing people like to say about Judith Vary, she's a glory hound or whatever. Bull crap. She hid this for years and years, for decades, because she was told to. And then Nigel Turner sort of blew her cover. From then on, she's been in the public consciousness. Vincent Palomera, we know what we know about the Secret Service because of Vincent Palomera. And he's done incredible work exposing the complicity of the Secret Service. Richard Belzer probably wrote the definitive work on all the body counts. I've been doing these body counts. I think I did 5 or 6 of them after each one of these investigations. And it's just a very partial list. You want the exhaustive list. You want to know, you want the authoritative version of all the people that have died mysteriously, tragically, violently, suspiciously, all of the above. Go read Richard Belzer's book, Hit List. Jefferson Morley runs a website. It's called jfkfacts.org. And what you want to know, first of all, he's written great books, and he does a lot of podcasting. He does a lot of YouTube videos. You want to know a fact, just go to that website, look it up. He adds, I've heard him say he tries to drop one new fact every day on that website, fact of the day. And he's real involved in the release of the advocating for the release of all the JFK documents. He's the first one, whenever documents get withheld, files the new lawsuit demanding that they be released. He's kind of the watchdog on the documents front. Roger Stone, people might say, well, that's an interesting name. Roger Stone is connected to a couple of these guys because he's still alive. You see him on TV. He's a Politico. He's not a researcher in a sense. He just happens to have a life story. It's very interesting, and it's woven in with some of these characters. For example, he was intimately involved with Richard Nixon's government and his campaigns. He knew Richard Nixon. He's the guy in his book tells us one night he's having that conversation with Richard Nixon. He says, "Tell me, Mr. President," after Nixon had had a couple martinis, he said, who killed Kennedy? Who really killed him?" And normally he says, Nixon's all buttoned up and he won't say anything. And he says, "Well, uh, Lyndon and I both want to be president. The difference is I wouldn't kill for it." So he's got that relationship with Nixon. Earlier, he had a relationship with with LBJ, and he wrote that book exposing LBJ's role. After that conversation with Nixon years later, he got real interested in LBJ's role, and he wrote the book about it. So because of him and Barr McClellan, we now know a lot more about LBJ's role in all of this. Roger Stone wrote about LBJ, also wrote about Nixon. And, he's one of those guys that you kind of eat the meat and throw out the bones kind of a guy, because he's a little hyperbolic sometimes. And he's a politico. That's what he does. But boy, the research, I can't dispute the research he's done and the firsthand knowledge that he has. Joan Mellon, another prominent Daniel Sheehan. I wanted to talk about Daniel Sheehan because I've relied on him heavily for my S-Force story. Daniel Sheehan, pictured here, the middle picture, that is a picture of him teaching. He is widely regarded as the first college professor to actually teach a class on the JFK assassination. He's known for it. He's come up with this flow chart. If you look at the top, it's a pretty complicated flow chart, but he teaches the JFK assassination and uses this flow chart to show all the moving parts. Boy, he's done exhaustive research on his own, but he also lived in some interesting times because he's an attorney by trade. He's a graduate of Harvard. I mean, this is a civil rights attorney extraordinaire, but he, as part of that law firm, F. Lee Bailey's law firm, he represented Santos Trafficante and also James McCord, one of the Watergate burglars. And in the process of trying to learn from Santos Trafficante who the Cubans were that were arrested with James McCord, they learned the S-Force story. And he teaches that in one of his classes. And of course, the information is just overwhelming. You can only take it in small bits at a time. But Daniel Sheehan has been very instrumental using his platform. He runs an institute, and part of the class offerings is this JFK, and it's always highly in demand. And he knew a lot of the inside workings of the government during that time because he came of age during that period. And he was a prominent Washington, D.C. lawyer during that period, represented a lot of these people. He knows the backstories. So learned a lot of information about JFK and Watergate, of course, and their relation. In fact, he teaches, just like we talked about the connections between Watergate and JFK. I didn't learn that on my own. I've stumbled on it from different sources, but he's one of them. And he's probably one of the best at explaining the connections between Watergate and JFK assassination. Probably one of the best. So where are we? After 6 investigations and 6 decades, I like to use or borrow from Oliver Stone's movie JFK, the 3 burning questions that we're going to look at next as we get into the actual conspirators. And the 3 questions are: number 1, why was JFK killed? That goes to motive. 2, who benefited? That goes to opportunity. And then who had the power to cover it up? Because there's clearly a cover-up that has taken place here that we need to look at, because the people who or institutions involved in the cover-up are probably the answer to number 2 and possibly even number 1. So all 3 of these questions we're going to be examining as we proceed from this point. I included these graphs to show you. Now, this is going up to about 2012 on the bottom, 2014 on the top. The question on the top: do you think one man Lee Harvey Oswald, was responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy, or do you think others were involved? The green line, it's kind of hard. It's not green. It's the, let's just say it's the bottom dark colored line, which starts off at 36%. There's one man. You can see it drops precipitously in 1977-78, which is about the time of the House Select Committee, which issues its ruling saying conspiracy. And it stays there and then kind of climbs there in 2014 back up to 30%. But look at the conspiracy, others involved. Starts at 50, goes up to 81 a couple times, and kind of settles in 2014 around 61%. My guess is it's even higher now. But anyway, it's double. So the folks who would make you believe that you're in the minority because you believe more than one person killed JFK are ignorant. They aren't aware that they're in the minority. If you look at the bottom question, do you think there was an official cover-up to keep the public from learning the truth? The yes is at the top. It closely mirrors the top graph. It's pretty close. You end up with a 62-28 instead of a 61-30, but it's about the same, double again. And so that tells you what the American people believe. They don't believe the lone gunman theory, and they don't believe the government's told us the truth. That's where we stand. And so as we proceed from this point, we are going to be looking at conspirators. I have 5, I believe, were involved. So we're going to take them one by one. And some of us, like conspirator 1, is an amalgamation of several entities that fit into one category. I'll have to define that category for you first, but we'll get into that beginning tomorrow, starting to take a look at who I think. First of all, we'll look at conspiracy and where this whole idea came from, because it came from some specific people, and then it spread. And then we'll start looking at the conspirators themselves. So that was a lot, but I hope you enjoyed it. Check out my website, sphistory.com. Give me a thumbs up if you like what you're seeing or hearing. Feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free. Hit the notification bell so you'll find out when new content drops. And until next time, I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks. Have a great day.